Susan had always thought of herself as careful. At 72, she still took pride in her tidy home and her independence, but one quiet morning, her world shifted. She looked out her kitchen window and saw her neighbor Harold collapse onto the pavement. He had slipped, broken his hip, and was carried away by paramedics. Susan stood frozen at the window, her hand pressed to the glass, her heart pounding. She could not shake the thought, what if that had been me? That single moment planted a fear deep inside her. Suddenly, everyday tasks felt treacherous. She clutched the railing with both hands when she climbed the porch steps. She hesitated before stepping into the shower. She even avoided carrying laundry down to the basement because the stairs looked steeper than ever. Her daughter reassured her that she was being cautious, but Susan knew it was more than caution. It was fear, the kind that grows in silence. Science tells us that this fear is not unusual. Nearly 1 in 3 older adults over 65 experiences a fall each year, and the consequences are serious. A broken hip, like Harold's, often leads to long hospital stays, and many seniors never regain full independence afterward. But what doctors emphasize, and what Susan didn't yet know, is that falls are not simply accidents waiting to happen. They are preventable often with the simplest of habits. That's a key point worth saying. Clearly, falls are preventable, not inevitable. Susan, however, felt powerless. She began to walk less, choosing the safety of her armchair over her evening strolls. But with each skipped step, her muscles weakened. That weakness, in turn, made her balance worse. It's a vicious cycle doctors see. Often fear of falling leads to inactivity. Inactivity leads to frailty, and frailty makes a fall more likely. When Susan looked in the mirror, she didn't just see lines on her face, she saw fragility sneaking into her body. One Sunday afternoon, while dusting her bookshelf, her eyes fell on an old photo of herself dancing at her granddaughter's wedding. She remembered the laughter, the movement, the way she spun without thinking of balance. Tears welled up. She whispered aloud, "Where did that woman go?" In that question was both grief and a glimmer of determination. This is where science and story meet. Research shows that even gentle, low-impact movement can reawaken balance and stability. Muscles respond at any age. Nerves adapt, connections strengthen, and confidence grows. For seniors like Susan, the answer doesn't lie in avoiding movement, but in practicing it safely, consistently, every day. And sometimes the most powerful tools aren't elaborate gyms or expensive equipment. Sometimes the solution is as simple as a sturdy chair. Susan's doctor would later explain that the chair acts like both anchor and teacher. It offers support. So there's no fear of falling during practice, while guiding the body through stretches that target the hips, thighs, and core, the muscles that protect balance. He called it the daily chair stretch. Done consistently, it reduces stiffness, builds strength, and rewires the body's reflexes so that if a stumble comes, the body knows how to catch itself. It's not a miracle, but it is a medicine of movement. That's the second way to say it. Daily chair stretches are not just exercises, they are prevention strategies, small acts that stop accidents before they ever happen. Susan didn't know any of this yet. All she felt was a growing sense of vulnerability and the shadow of Harold's accident following her around her home. But in the quiet of her fear, she began to wonder, was there something simple she could do right here in her living room to take back control? That question was the seed of change. And here's the third way to say it. Simple daily movement is the shield that stands between seniors and falls. Falls are not fate. and fear does not have to rule the day. Susan was on the edge of discovering that truth. For now, she set down the photo and sat in her chair staring at her hands. Her heart was heavy, but beneath the weight was a whisper of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her balance again. Susan sat nervously in the small examination room. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. The smell of disinfectant and the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. She hadn't seen her doctor in nearly a year, but her daughter insisted on this visit after noticing how hesitant Susan had become in her movements. When Dr. Collins entered, his calm presence immediately softened the tension. He was in his mid-50s, with the kind of demeanor that felt more like a neighbor stopping by than a physician delivering news. He looked over her chart, then studied her carefully as she described her recent fear of walking the skipped strolls the way she now gripped the handrail like a lifeline. "Susan," he said gently, "what you're describing is something I see often. Fear of falling is very real, but if it keeps you from moving, the body becomes weaker. And weakness is the very thing that makes a fall more likely." His words landed heavily, but they carried truth she couldn't deny. He explained that muscle strength and balance decline quickly with inactivity, especially in older adults. Sitting too much shortens the hip flexors, weakens the thighs, and reduces blood flow. The vestibular system, the inner ear's balance center, also becomes sluggish without practice. In other words, her very attempt to stay safe by limiting movement was quietly increasing her danger. Susan swallowed hard. "So what do I do, doctor? I don't feel safe walking around the block anymore." Dr. Collins smiled kindly. "We don't start with the block. We start with the chair." He pulled a sturdy chair from the corner of the room and demonstrated. He sat tall, extended one leg forward with the heel touching the floor, then leaned slightly forward as though stretching the muscles of his thigh and hip. He alternated sides, showing how the motion was both simple and secure with the chair as a stable anchor. "This is what I call the daily chair stretch," he explained. "It keeps the muscles in your legs and core awake. It reminds your body how to balance itself. And because you're supported by the chair, you don't have to fear falling during the exercise." Susan watched with a mix of relief and disbelief. It looked almost too simple. But Dr. Collins assured her that science supported it. Studies show that regular stretching combined with light strength work significantly reduces fall risk in older adults. The chair provides a safe framework while still challenging the muscles and nervous system to engage. "Remember," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, "it's not about how fast you do it, but that you do it daily. 5 minutes can change more than you think." For the first time in months, Susan felt a spark of possibility. She thought of Harold still recovering from his hip fracture, and she thought of her own independence. Could something so small really stand between her and the same fate emotion welled up in her chest? She wasn't just afraid of falling. She was afraid of losing herself, of being forced into a nursing home, of depending on her daughter for every small need. The idea of a simple daily movement that could protect her was like a lifeline being handed to her in the dark. Dr. Collins leaned in, his voice gentle but firm. "Susan, age does not take away your ability to strengthen yourself. Movement is medicine, and you can begin right where you are." That was the point she needed to hear most. It wasn't her age that defined her future. It was her daily habits. That's a key truth for seniors. Daily mobility matters far more than the number of birthdays behind them. Even the smallest commitment, like a chair stretch, can tip the scales from frailty to resilience. Susan nodded slowly, her grip on fear loosening just a little. She left the office with a paper in her purse detailing the stretch, but more importantly, with a fragile sense of hope in her heart. She had a starting point, a plan, and the knowledge that her doctor believed she could do it. As she walked out into the autumn sunlight, she whispered to herself, "I can start with the chair." And in that moment, the first step toward reclaiming her confidence had already begun. The afternoon sun spilled across Susan's living room as she placed the sturdy wooden chair in the center of the rug. She took a deep breath, her palms slightly damp. It felt strange, almost ceremonial, to prepare for something so simple. Yet in her heart, it carried the weight of a turning point. She sat down, straightened her back, and repeated Dr. Collins's instructions in her mind. Sit tall, extend one leg. Keep the heel on the floor and lean gently forward. She stretched her right leg, the movement shaky, her muscles tight from disuse. A tremor of doubt rushed through her. Her body didn't feel strong. It felt foreign, like a language she hadn't spoken in years. At first, she could only hold the stretch for a few seconds before retreating, her thigh quivering as though it had been asked to carry far too much. She switched legs, but the left side protested even more, sending a ripple of discomfort through her hip. Susan frowned. How could something so simple feel so difficult? But this is exactly what science predicts. When the body stays still for too long, the neuromuscular system, the intricate dance between brain nerves and muscles, loses sharpness. Muscles weaken, and reflexes slow. That's why even the smallest motions can feel heavy at first. Yet, like tuning an instrument, repeated practice brings harmony back. Susan reminded herself of that truth as she sat in silence, her chest rising and falling with a mix of fear and determination. She remembered Dr. Collins' words, "5 minutes can change more than you think." She set a mental timer, promising herself to last those minutes, however imperfectly. The first stretch passed awkwardly. The second felt steadier. By the third, she found her breathing aligning with the movement, her body loosening ever so slightly. She began to sense that the chair wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was her partner, her safety net. The fear of falling through, still present, softened with each repetition. She imagined the stretch as a conversation with her body. At first, the body whispered, "I'm stiff. I'm weak. I'm tired." But as she continued, the voice changed. "I remember this. I can do this." That small shift, invisible to anyone else, was enormous to her. Science calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt even in older age. Every time Susan stretched her leg, her brain was rewiring itself, re-establishing the pathways of balance and coordination. It wasn't just muscle at work. It was memory connection resilience. That's why this simple chair stretch matters so deeply. It trains both body and brain to stay alert and steady. Still, progress came wrapped in frustration. At one point, Susan leaned too far and felt her balance tilt. She quickly grabbed the side of the chair, her heart pounding. She sat frozen for a moment, the image of Harold's fall flashing in her mind. Her fear whispered again, "This is dangerous. Stop." But she didn't stop. She straightened, took another breath, and began again, slower, gentler, more mindful. She realized then that this wasn't just about stretching her muscles. It was about stretching her courage, testing the fragile line between fear and hope. By the time the 5 minutes ended, her thighs burned faintly. Her hips felt looser, and her spirit carried a flicker of pride. She had done it not perfectly, not gracefully, but honestly, and that was enough. She leaned back in the chair, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. For months, she had been shrinking, retreating into fear. But now she had moved. She had faced the weight of her own body and discovered that it could still respond. Susan whispered softly into the empty room, "I'm not broken. I'm still here." And with that, her journey at home had begun. The first week of Susan's new routine felt like a fragile success. Each afternoon, she placed the wooden chair in her living room, stretched her legs, and breathed through the motions. Her body responded slowly, but she felt herself loosening, her confidence inching upward. She even caught herself humming while she practiced a sound she hadn't made in months. But progress, as life so often reminds us, is never a straight line. On the 8th day, Susan attempted to stretch a little farther, leaning forward with her right leg extended. For a moment, it felt good, almost liberating. Then her heel slipped slightly on the rug. Her balance wavered. She grasped at the chair, her heart racing as the memory of Harold crashing to the pavement thundered in her mind. She did not fall. She caught herself in time. Yet the stumble was enough to unravel her fragile courage. She sat, frozen breath, shallow tears stinging her eyes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she whispered. For a moment, she considered quitting, pushing the chair back against the wall and retreating into the cocoon of stillness she had built around herself. Doctors know this stage well. Setbacks in balance training are common, but they can either break determination or deepen it. When the body falters, the nervous system learns, recalibrates, and becomes more resilient if the person chooses to continue. It's the same principle that athletes use when training. Small failures teach the body how to adapt. For seniors, the process is gentler, but no less powerful. Susan sat quietly listening to her pounding heart. She realized that the chair had done exactly what it promised. It had supported her. Even in that shaky moment, she had not fallen. The very tool meant to keep her safe had proven itself. That recognition brought a wave of relief. This isn't the end, she told herself firmly. This is the lesson. She adjusted the rug beneath her feet, making sure it was flat, and tried again. This time, she moved slower, leaning only as far as she could while feeling steady. Her hands rested lightly on the chair for reassurance. The stretch was smaller, but the sense of control was greater. And this is the heart of fall prevention. It isn't about eliminating risk entirely, but about building the body's ability to recover from wobbles. That's worth emphasizing. Clearly, setbacks are not signs of weakness. They are opportunities for the body to strengthen its reflexes, for balance to be restored. In fact, setbacks are part of progress. Susan began to see that truth with new eyes. Each repetition, even the imperfect ones, was teaching her nervous system how to respond more quickly. Every small shake, every tremble was a rehearsal for real life, a way to prepare her body to withstand the unexpected. She remembered Dr. Collins' words, "Safety first, always. Consistency is what matters." Those words became her mantra. Safety first. Consistency wins. She repeated them aloud as she practiced her voice, steadying her mind. By the end of the session, Susan felt calmer. The fear had not vanished, but it had shifted shape. Instead of being a paralyzing force, it became a reminder of why she was doing this work at all. The stumble had not defeated her. It had revealed her resilience. Later that evening, as she sat by the window watching the sun sink into the horizon, she reflected on her day. She knew the path ahead would not be smooth. There would be other slips, other moments of fear. But she also knew she had discovered something powerful. She could stumble and still keep going. That's the second way to put it: consistency. Not perfection is what protects independence. Even shaky steps move you forward if you keep taking them. And here is the third truth worth repeating. Safety always comes first. The chair. The pace, the awareness, these are the tools that turn fear into progress. Susan closed her eyes and smiled softly. She hadn't failed. She had begun to grow. The stumble was not the end of her journey. It was the spark that made her resolve stronger than before. Susan woke the next morning with a curious feeling in her legs. Not pain, but a gentle soreness that reminded her she had used them. She ran her hands over her thighs and realized she hadn't felt this kind of strength in years. It was subtle, but undeniable, like the first green shoots breaking through soil in spring. She placed her chair in the middle of the room again, this time with less hesitation. The stumble from the day before was still fresh in her memory, but it no longer terrified her. Instead, it reminded her of the mantra she had repeated. Safety first, consistency wins. She sat tall, extended her right leg, and stretched forward slowly. The movement felt steadier, almost familiar. When she switched to her left side, she found herself leaning a little farther than before, without fear. Susan smiled. It was small progress, but it was hers. And that sense of achievement washed over her like warm sunlight. Science explains this change. Muscles adapt to use through a process called hypertrophy fibers. Grow stronger when challenged even gently. Balance improves because the nervous system sharpens its coordination. For seniors, this adaptation can begin within weeks. The body doesn't stop learning at 60, 70, or even 90. It responds to effort at any age, and every repetition reinforces both physical strength and confidence. Susan could feel it happening. The dizziness that sometimes greeted her when she stood up from a chair seemed to fade. Her posture felt more upright as she walked to the kitchen. Even her breathing felt deeper, steadier, as though the stretch had unlocked something more than just muscle fibers. One afternoon, she decided to add a simple layer. As she stretched her leg forward, she inhaled deeply through her nose, then exhaled slowly as she leaned forward. The rhythm calmed her nerves and gave her focus. It was as if her breath and her body were finally in conversation again, working together instead of against each other. That day, her daughter Lisa dropped by unexpectedly. Susan was in the middle of her stretch when Lisa entered. For a moment, embarrassment flickered. She wasn't used to being seen in this vulnerable effort. But Lisa's eyes lit up with pride. "Mom, look at you," she exclaimed. "You look stronger already." Susan felt her cheeks flush, not with shame, but with joy. She hadn't realized how much she wanted someone else to notice. Lisa sat nearby watching as Susan extended her legs one after the other. The smile on her daughter's face mirrored her own, and suddenly the exercise felt less like a chore and more like a victory lap. Emotion surged. Susan realized she was no longer exercising just for herself. She was doing it for her family, too. to give Lisa peace of mind, to show her grandchildren that aging doesn't have to mean decline, to reclaim a sense of dignity that fear had tried to steal. That's the essence of these small wins. They are not just physical, they ripple outward into confidence, connection, and joy. For seniors, the tiniest improvement can feel like climbing a mountain, and that feeling can fuel even greater progress. By the end of the week, Susan's routine had transformed. She no longer needed to summon courage each time she moved the chair. It had become a habit woven into the rhythm of her days. She looked forward to it, anticipating the little rush of pride that came when she felt her foot extend a bit farther, or her back sit a bit taller. And that's the point to underline here: confidence grows with repetition. Each session was proof that her body could change, that her story wasn't finished, that fear didn't get the final word. One evening, as Susan stretched in the fading light, she caught her reflection in the window. She saw a woman not defined by fear, but by quiet determination. She saw the small wins, and she saw the smile that came with them. For the first time in months, she believed she was moving toward a future brighter than the one she had feared. Lisa had grown accustomed to worrying about her mother. Each time she called, she braced herself for news of another stumble or a story about Susan avoiding the basement stairs. But during her most recent visit, she noticed something different the moment she walked through the door. Her mother stood a little taller. There was a lightness in her step as she crossed the living room, and the usual hand on the wall for balance was missing. Lisa blinked almost in disbelief. "Mom." "You're moving differently," she said, setting her purse down. Susan smiled shyly. "I've been practicing the chair stretch Dr. Collins showed me. Every day, just 5 minutes." Lisa's eyebrows lifted. "Really? And it's helping?" Susan nodded, and without waiting for another word, she pulled the sturdy wooden chair into place. She sat down, straightened her back, and extended her right leg, leaning forward with steady control. Her movements weren't perfect, but they were confident. She switched sides, her breath slow and calm, her posture firm. Lisa watched with awe. Only a month ago, her mother had been timid, fearful of even the simplest motions. Now she was demonstrating exercises with a quiet pride that made Lisa's heart swell. "Mom," she said softly, "you look strong." That affirmation carried more weight than Susan expected. Tears pricked her eyes as she held the stretch, the words echoing inside her chest. She had not felt strong in a very long time. Science validates what Lisa was seeing. Regular stretching improves flexibility, strengthens supporting muscles, and reduces the hesitancy that often leads to missteps. When family members notice these changes, it reinforces the new habit. Social support, researchers have found, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success in senior exercise programs. A kind word, a watchful eye, a shared smile. They all make the difference between giving up and keeping at it. Lisa, inspired by her mother's determination, decided to join in. She pulled another chair beside Susan and mimicked the stretch. The two women laughed when Lisa nearly toppled forward on her first attempt. "You make it look easier than it is," Lisa admitted. Susan beamed, her confidence boosted by the role reversal. For once, she was the teacher, not the one being protected. The living room filled with laughter, but beneath it lay something deeper, a bond renewed. Susan no longer felt like a burden. Instead, she felt like a partner in her daughter's health, both of them moving, both of them learning. Over the following weeks, Lisa continued to check in. Sometimes she joined her mother for a session. Other times, she simply asked how the practice was going. Each question reminded Susan that she wasn't alone in her journey. It became easier to stay consistent because she knew someone cared enough to notice. That's the key point here: support makes habits stick. The science of behavior change is clear accountability increases adherence. And for seniors, having a family member encourage daily movement can mean the difference between a life of fear and a life of independence. Susan felt this truth in her bones. When her daughter cheered her on the chair, no longer seemed like a symbol of frailty. It became a symbol of progress, of connection, of hope. One evening, as they practiced together, Lisa turned to her mother and said, "You know, Mom, I don't worry about you as much anymore." Susan paused mid-stretch, her eyes glistening. Those words meant more than any medical report. They meant that her efforts were not only protecting her health, but also giving her family peace. Later that night, Susan sat quietly in her armchair, reflecting. The fear that once dominated her days had softened into something manageable. She knew challenges would come, but she also knew she had her daughter's support, and that made her stronger than she'd ever imagined. The family had noticed, and in their eyes, Susan found the courage to keep moving forward. Susan woke to the sound of birds outside her window, the kind of gentle morning music she once took for granted. She stretched her arms overhead before even leaving bed, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel that subtle dread of standing up too quickly. Instead, she swung her legs over the side, planted her feet firmly on the carpet, and rose with surprising steadiness. As she walked into the kitchen, she noticed something almost startling. She didn't reach for the wall. The reflexive touch she had relied on for months was gone. She moved freely, her steps light, her posture upright. A smile spread across her face. She realized she was no longer surviving her days, she was living them. That morning, she placed her chair in the living room as usual, but the ritual felt different now. It wasn't a chore or a source of fear. It was a celebration, a reminder of how far she had come. She sat tall, extended her legs one by one, and felt her muscles engage with confidence. Her breath matched the rhythm of her movement, slow and steady, like music guiding her body. The science behind this transformation is both simple and profound. With regular stretching, Susan had reawakened her proprioception, the body's ability to sense its position in space. Stronger muscles, sharper reflexes, and improved balance worked together to keep her steady. More importantly, the practice restored her confidence, which research shows is just as critical as physical ability in preventing falls. A confident step is a safer step. Encouraged by her progress, Susan decided to expand her routine. After finishing her chair stretch, she slipped on her walking shoes and stepped outside. The autumn air was crisp, and the sidewalk stretched before her like an old friend she hadn't visited in too long. At first, she walked slowly, carefully, but soon her stride lengthened. Each step was a declaration. "I am not fragile." Neighbors waved as she passed. "Good to see you out again, Susan," one called. She waved back, her cheeks glowing with pride. For months, she had hidden inside, afraid of what might happen. Now she was reclaiming her place in the world. Emotions swelled as she thought of her grandchildren. Not long ago, she had dreaded the idea of playing with them in the yard, fearing a stumble. Now she pictured herself standing tall as they ran around her, confident she could keep up, or at least not collapse under the weight of fear. This is what fall prevention truly offers, not just safety, but freedom. That's a key truth worth underlining. Prevention keeps independence alive. A daily chair stretch may look small, but its ripple effect extends into every corner of life, from the kitchen to the sidewalk to family gatherings. Susan returned home after her short walk. Her cheeks flushed, her spirit soaring. She sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on the journey. She remembered the fear that had once kept her prisoner in her own home, the trembling legs that had made her doubt her future. And she contrasted it with the woman she felt like now, steadier, freer, more herself. Collins had been right. Movement was medicine. But it wasn't just her body that had healed. Her heart had healed too. Each day of practice had chipped away at fear and replaced it with strength. Later that evening, as she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Susan caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She saw not a frail woman on the brink of decline, but a resilient woman who had chosen courage over fear. She whispered softly to herself, "I'm walking again. I'm living again." And in that whisper was a truth stronger than any stumble confidence had been restored. It was a crisp spring morning when Susan decided to try something she hadn't dared in years. Music drifted softly through her living room, the same song her granddaughter had chosen for her wedding dance. Susan placed her chair nearby, not as a crutch, but as a companion. She stood tall, let the rhythm guide her, and began to sway. At first, the movements were slow, measured. Then, as the melody carried her, she allowed herself to twirl, her laughter spilling into the air. Months of consistent chair stretches had led her to this moment. What once felt impossible, dancing without fear, was now her celebration. She was not reckless, but she was free. Her body remembered balance, her legs held steady, and her heart sang with gratitude. Science affirms what Susan's joy demonstrated. Fall prevention is not about restriction. It is about empowerment. Daily chair stretches had restored her flexibility, strengthened her core, and sharpened her reflexes. More importantly, they had rewired her mind. She no longer moved like someone waiting for disaster. She moved like someone who trusted her own body again. And that shift, confidence reborn, is one of the most powerful protections against falls. This truth deserves to be emphasized clearly and fully. Independence is preserved through daily prevention. Every small movement, every stretch was a brick in the foundation that kept her upright. Falls are not destiny. They are risks that can be reduced, even reversed, with consistency. And perhaps most importantly, faith is stronger than fear. That's the threefold truth Susan's story revealed. Her daughter Lisa noticed the difference too. One afternoon, she found Susan in the yard, tending to her flowers. The cane that once leaned by the door was nowhere in sight. Susan knelt, gently planted marigold seeds, and rose without struggle. Lisa's eyes welled with tears. "Mom, you're amazing," she whispered. Susan smiled, brushing soil from her hands. "I just kept moving," she said simply. That simplicity held the weight of transformation. The daily chair stretch had not required expensive trainers or complicated equipment. It had required only a chair, 5 minutes, and the willingness to begin. Yet those minutes had multiplied into months of strength, freedom, and peace of mind. For seniors everywhere, Susan's story carries a message: fear of falling does not have to define your life. With one small daily commitment, you can reclaim stability, independence, and joy. Doctors may provide the guidance, but the power rests in your own choice to move. Susan felt that power most vividly when she visited her church social one evening. Friends who hadn't seen her in months gasped at her steadiness. "You look 10 years younger," one remarked. Susan laughed and replying, "It's just my chair stretch." They chuckled, but she meant it. That humble exercise had given her back more than balance, it had given her back herself. As the evening ended, Susan walked home under the glow of streetlights, her steps unhurried and sure. She thought of Harold still recovering from his fall, and silently wished he could know the strength she had found. She thought of all the seniors who lived under the shadow of fear, who avoided stairs, skipped walks, and let life shrink around them. She longed for them to know what she now knew. Prevention is possible. Freedom is possible. Life without fear is possible. Back home, she set her chair in its familiar place. She closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Not just to the doctor who had guided her, or the daughter who had encouraged her, but to herself for refusing to surrender. And in that gratitude was the greatest lesson of all. Aging was not the end of her story. It was simply another chapter. One she had chosen to write with strength, hope, and the daily practice of movement. If you found this helpful, please subscribe, like, and share. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what topics you want next. From all of us at Healthy Aging, wishing you good health.